Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to Last Dinosaur. And I'm your host, Chris Aversano. Today's podcast, we have Despina Panayiotou Theodosiou, co-CEO of Tototheo Maritime. Despina is a fellow Sea Trade Maritime Ambassador and past president of Wista International. Tototheo Maritime specializes in maritime technology, focusing on optimizing vessel and fleet performance. They provide a range of services, including innovative, efficient, and functional solutions in the fields of satellite communication, navigation system, digitization, and end-to-end cybersecurity services. Headquarters are in Cyprus, with branch offices in Greece and Germany, with partner offices in Dubai and Singapore. Despina, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you for coming on. I always like to start off a little bit like, let's talk about, your journey with Tototheo, what's going on with the company today, and kind of what are you focusing on now? Because you guys do a wide breadth of services. I'd love to hear what you're doing today.
Tototheo Maritime is a family company, and that's in every sense of the word, as my husband and I are co-CEOs. I focus mainly on the commercial aspects and the financial aspects of the business, and my husband is focusing more on the technology aspect. For the last few years, we have an office in Greece. We since last year, we have an office in Germany. We have partner offices in other parts of the world, but our headquarters remain in Cyprus, which is a small country, but it really has a huge maritime heart. So in the Cyprus maritime cluster, we all know each other very well. And I believe that this has been very helpful for our business, but also for other business based out of there. Tototheo Maritime is actually a group of companies. You mentioned before some of our services. So our services include satellite connectivity, they include digital solutions, but we also sell and provide bridge equipment. So our services and our products, they are at the cusp of digitalization. And to ensure that, we give our clients what they need, we have to have people working for our business who can see new opportunities, who have new ideas, and have the desire to be there as things change. So we've never been really afraid of change. And and I know we're in the business, and anyone who's in the maritime and the shipping industry knows that we are going through a period of, I would say, extraordinary change. We have new technologies, we have new regulations, we have new expectations from all stakeholders, which is a very important aspect. And maybe we don't talk about that as much as we should, the new expectations that we have. I would say this is no longer a maritime, a shipping industry that is based around, a multi-million-dollar asset that just disappears over the horizon. And we just arrive for it to reach we just wait for it to reach its destination. Now we can track ship and cargo all the way, and we can feel the very pulse of the ship throughout its life. And I think this is what is so magical about being in this industry now, and this is what I enjoy and really like about it. It's how can I describe it? It's like a bubbling cauldron of ideas thanks to digitalization, but digitalization is so much more than a casual word. It's the tools that are creating this, and this is where we are with our company and where I love being in the role that I have.
That sounds really very cool, and I think you're my first guest that I've had on from Cyprus, so which is kind of neat. Which is also, talks about, I think, like you said, one of the exciting things for me personally about getting into the maritime industry, and I don't have a family background, is the global view, right? I mean, it is just a global view, and I find myself to be extremely lucky. I consider myself to be extremely lucky on a day-to-day basis that I get to deal with. I think everybody deals with headaches. I get to deal with international headaches, which is actually a lot of fun. And it really gives a different view. You kind of mentioned about kind of where you are today, but you've been involved in the digital space and really in the satellite side and these other businesses for a while now. You talk about change as well. So what are some of these big changes that you've seen? And is there anything that you go, wow, I haven't seen that coming? And it may not necessarily be with satellite, but just in our industry in general. What can you point to there in kind of that change?
Well, Chris, if you allow me, before I talk about change, you mentioned that I'm in the industry for a really long time, and I'm in this industry, in the satellite connectivity industry for most of my career. But I didn't start with that. My father was in the shipping industry, and I found it exciting, but I didn't want to do actual shipping. So I'm in technology and connectivity, which really shows the multifaceted character of shipping and the maritime industry. So you can do so many different things within the maritime spectrum. So that's really fascinating. And it's something that perhaps we should communicate more to the younger generation. And also, I didn't start with that. I studied economics and I thought I wanted to be in banking. So that was a complete failure. I started with banking and I really did not like it. So again, that's a message to the younger generation that it's okay to try a few things before you find your calling. So when it comes to the biggest change perhaps that I've seen, it is definitely how many satellites we have now in space and the coverage that we can get within the maritime industry. Tototheo started when satellite communication was in its infancy. It was started by my father-in-law. And it really started with the early voice connections on the first Marisat links. That's what it was called in the 70s. Now we have the opportunity for continual data flow. So to put that into perspective, the first Marisat went into space in 1976. That was almost 50 years ago. It was, of course, not the first satellite. The first satellite was just over a decade before that, but it heralded a change in maritime connectivity that has progressed steadily up to when digital broadband connectivity revolutionized really communication in society. And, IT and communication were evolving, but we had no idea how that change would speed up, particularly in the last decade. And now we're on a wave of exploration as companies look for new ways to use this connectivity to share data and insight and to make, particularly in shipping, operations that are cleaner, safer, and of course more profitable. They still need to make a profit. They are businesses. And if I were to pick on one aspect to show change, and from our roles within as sea trade ambassadors, that I'm very passionate about people. And to really pick on that aspect, now we have crews able to use social media at sea, hopefully for a minimal cost, and that helps with welfare. We have the possibility of, immersive digital learning to ensure crews are engaged and safe. So connectivity does not only help on the business aspect, but it does help on the welfare aspect and on being able to attract the younger generation to see.
That's really interesting because I had a few guests on the podcast back at the end of last year. Reverend Mark Nesselhut, who is the head of Siemens Church here in the U.S. I had the Coast Guard Admiral John Mauger, who is now a commandant of District 1, but he was in his role in the Coast Guard. They all talk about connectivity. From a safety, but then also from a crew welfare point of view. Salvatore D'Amico as well was on crew welfare. We have to keep, especially coming out of COVID, right? It was super important that, these sailors, seafarers. I mean, I think the longest I spent on a ship was 127 days, and I thought it was the end of the world, right? 127. And by the way, it was coastwise trading in the U.S. It wasn't exactly hardship. I'll tell you that right now. The point is some of these sailors being on during COVID for for double-digit months or longer, connectivity became such a huge thing. And I think you also touched upon another thing. We had a guest on recently, Lourdes Evans, who talked about digital learning, learning, but at sea, augmenting actually, and that's a seafarer, not only safety, but it's also a welfare issue, because then it reduces the amount of time that seafarers have to then come home and then go to a training center for 2 weeks, which is another welfare, kind of issue. So that's a really interesting kind of development. That's something that I didn't personally think about when I was sailing, but certainly is now at the forefront for sure.
It's becoming more and more important, and let's not forget that the younger generation, they grow up being connected. So we really need to change the situation on board to make it more comfortable for them to be in a space where they understand, to be able to attract them there, but also for them to feel good on board and to keep them there, because attracting is one issue, but keeping them on board ships is another. And it's a very difficult situation right now. Again, I have been very vocal about this, and we have discussed it together before. You just mentioned it. It wasn't a good situation during COVID. I'm not afraid to say that in some aspects we have failed seafarers. So now we need to do much more to make sure that they understand that we do care for them. This needs actions, not just talking about it.
Exactly. And I always, think about, with the connectivity now and what you said, kind of going forward, which kind of lead me to my next question about connectivity is kind of what improvements. And it sounds like the improvements that we need to make is to figure out what that next generation of seafarers are going to require to have a satisfactory work environment, I think, right? And is it just, straight up like, oh, they can access, Instagram and do this and do that, or is it something a little bit beyond? But I think that's important. It sounds like, that's the health of seafarers and the associated connectivity is definitely linked, and that's really going to be part of the future solution.
Definitely. And I think it's beyond just, of course, being connected to your family through social media or what have you. It's very important for them. Through connectivity, we also can enhance safety, and that's another important issue. Really, when it comes to connectivity and how it's changing the maritime landscape, I think we're just at the beginning of how computer algorithms can offer new insights and how they can offer predictive solutions. AI and machine learning will enable more remote opportunities, as we've discussed. And this will not be, because sometimes people are scared about the opportunities and possibilities, perhaps, that these new technologies bring. So I want to say this will not be about unmanned ships as such, but about streamlined crew support. So there's two things here that perhaps are not mentioned that often. One is the quality of the sensors to collect data. They are smaller, they're faster, they're able to record data in terms of, every second, and no longer with the crew member having to read a dial and input figures into a spreadsheet. So it's helping in that aspect. And of course, the other is data speeds, both up and down the pipe. We often talk about the speed of data to the ship, but with this increase in data coming off the ship, it can be more easily sent ashore if needed, or just as easily stored and then sent later. And of course, a third element then is the ability to use software as a service and cloud storage to access and share and utilize this huge volume of information. So as I said, we're still at the beginning, but I think the opportunities are vast.
Yeah, and I think some of those sensors, I mean, one of the biggest issues, we've been talking about crew welfare and safety and well-being, but then also there is the E part of it, the environmental part, right? And getting and transmitting data that's going to be needed for, what are you doing in terms of your emissions, right? And this is a huge part where connectivity is going to have to be able to keep up with what's going on the vessel in terms of that. I mean, because yeah, I guess you could do a data dump at the end of each voyage, but does that allow for maybe some the data to be corrupted? And I'm not saying corrupted in the negative, in the in the somebody's changing numbers, but are you storing the packet? How are you doing this? I think what people are going to want is a real-time picture on what you're emitting and where and when.
And I think what you're saying just right now is what's really important when it comes to the environmental goals that we have, because technology brings greater transparency. I believe that with technology, we will be able to fulfill our goals much better. Are we there yet? I feel that we need many technologies to be able to get to that point. It's not one answer and it's not one solution. And I think that's something that we as an industry have accepted now. But definitely technology is what is going to help us get there.
No doubt about it. And I do think, the issue around transparency has never been more important, not only from emissions, but now we're dealing with, I heard a number, at least on the tanker fleet, of between 400 and 500 tankers that are, in that zone of, of trading on the sanctioned cargoes. Saying that, okay, what are they admitting? Well, that's probably the last thing that they're thinking of. So now you have this confluence of, well, we'll give you you're not going to have, you can have a shipowner say, here's our emission numbers. Well, where were you? Well, I can't tell you that. You really get into a layer of, and what are those sensors transmitting? Because like you said, it cuts to the chase on transparency. Yes. It is, I think you said earlier, one of the most exciting times in our industry, certainly from a digital point of view, certainly in the last, and even with you go back to the technology bubble that we saw in our space, and overall, but certainly on a smaller scale, 20 years ago, I think this pales, that pales in comparison to where we are today, for sure.
Well, we're moving forward. We're going to see a lot of change, and of course, being able to handle change and accept it and being agile is what is going to help businesses, but also us personally as professionals to move forward. I believe that being able to handle change is what is going to be very important in terms of how businesses hire in the future. Things are very fluid now, and you need to be comfortable with that. You need to be able to operate within that environment.
I'm trying to remember the exact words, but I think that Lois Zabrocki said our industry is the one that does best with, it wasn't adversarial conditions. It was, she basically was saying that what we do best is deal with the change, deal with the situation that's not perfect, come up with the solution and move on. And I forgot, she said it much more eloquently than I did. And I think I'll see her next couple of weeks, but she said it perfectly. And I think that that's what our industry has done in the past, especially with operational issues, but now we have to expand that to kind of other aspects, which brings me into my next point. I could call you Madam President or Madam Former President of LISTA, and just as I am former president of the CMA. And I'd like to kind of compare a little bit of some notes here. You and I had that in common. I think you were president during COVID, as was I for the CMA. You were president much longer than me, but my 2 years were the COVID years, 2020 to 2022. Talk to me. We talk about connectivity with the ships and things like that. But one of the reasons why I started this podcast was I kind of had an itch to kind of, my creative side, to be in contact with people. Talk to me about how WISTA did internationally with bringing people together, because you guys did a lot of stuff. I felt that your visibility went up during COVID. Talk to me a little bit about that, a little bit how you did with membership, just overall kind of, how you handle that during a unique challenge that hopefully we'll never have to deal with.
Indeed, part of my presidency was during COVID, and it was certainly an interesting experience. In terms of whether the pandemic allowed us to connect with members, I would say yes and no. As an organization pushing for diversity, we had to battle with the gender imbalance that COVID created. Unfortunately, that is true. The UN raised that issue, that it has taken us back in terms of what we achieved the years before that. And
Excuse me.
Wista's
That's actually. I'm sorry, but that to me is a little bit surprising because I think that
yeah,
with connectivity, you would have an opportunity to look for people, more diverse group, right?
yeah.
Because of, well, I can hire anybody. I don't need to hire somebody that's sitting in Connecticut. We can hire somebody that's sitting in the middle of wherever, but they fit the bill. That's interesting. I'm not. I just that's a really interesting, and I'm a little bit surprised. I think it would be a little anti. It's anti what I was thinking.
How you're thinking is correct. However, that was the result, and this is where we are today. But during the pandemic, WISTA is truly global. So we observed the reaction to COVID and the effect it had on women in different countries and different cultures. So we saw many differences when it comes to that. In some countries, we could see that it really created a lot of issues. In some others, where, for example, employees' rights are more protected, we saw something different. But also it was different in terms of how people at home handled it. In some countries, we could see that responsibilities were shared more evenly. In other countries, we could see that that wasn't the case at all. So it depends on the point of view that you're looking at it. We did run a survey as WISTA International on how the pandemic affected women within our industry. Actually, we worked with a university in Brazil, the Espírito Santo University, and we had researchers looking into this. And indeed, in some cases, the results we had were what you mentioned before, that businesses said that we can hire anywhere we want, we can find talent. But again, we had to translate that in terms of the membership of WISTA, because the survey was within our membership. Our membership mainly focuses on women in higher level positions. So we looked at that in terms of having women in positions that are on the lower seniority or lower level. When businesses had to cut back, those were the first to go. The situation with COVID translates in many different ways, which was what made it so complicated. It was also difficult for us as a board within WISTA to deal with this. Some countries suffered more than others, or the governments of those countries dealt with it differently. So there were countries where our membership really suffered and had a lot of difficulties handling the situation, whereas in others it was easier to connect and have seminars online and have our meetings online. So it was a very peculiar situation, if I may say so. And it also, at least personally, it made me aware of the privilege that we have in some countries in terms of having access to healthcare, having access to even the Wi-Fi. Some countries, they even had difficulties with that. So in essence, you become isolated if you don't have access to the internet, or to good Wi-Fi. So it does make you very well aware of your privilege. And I think, and I hope it helped us work towards that and understand our members around the world better. And now there's a new president, of course. I have to say, the national WISTA associations, they are great. They do a lot of work within their national jurisdictions and also in their areas. And we have a new president that really understands all these issues. And I do have faith that the new board and the new president will take whatever we have done, our little contribution, and make it much better and take it much higher. I do have faith in that.
That's really very eye-opening because CMA is more of a regional type thing. Although I have to say two things: one, I'm a Wista Mista, so I appreciate
I know.
everything that you do. And two is before COVID started, and as I was getting ready to move into the CMA president's role, I looked at Wista and I said, the way that they organize, you have a central thing and then you have chapters. is a very effective way, and something that I thought about. And then we got COVID, and I said, well, I can't think about that now. We just got to stay solvent, and we were able to do some things, again, dealing strictly with regional, issues, mostly Connecticut, Texas people, US. It was less of an issue around that. We did have issues, believe it or not, with people who said, I'm not paying my dues $100, very similar to what we have here in the US for Wista, because you guys don't do anything. We can kind of use your dual dues when this is going on. Like, I always felt that was a little weird because, we try to give, I know the CMA tries to get back in the community, especially around education, scholarships, and things like that is an important part of that. But what you're saying is very interesting, and something that I hope that the listeners kind of realize, that, like, the takeaway that I have is that, yes, I was very privileged, even in comparison to some places where it was okay. I know in Greece and parts of Europe, you were not really allowed out of your apartment. And I know other people, even in the US, who didn't want to leave their apartments. I am very lucky. 3 meters, not even 2 meters to my left, is a door to the outside. So literally I could walk in my backyard. And I was able to do that during COVID. And even that was very privileged to me, where there was a lot of people who couldn't even do that without a lot of fear or without registering with the government and so on. So, yeah.
But that's really important, Chris, what you're saying now, because we just talked about Wista and how we saw the whole situation affecting women. But really, we should also be talking about how it affected people in general. It was a very difficult situation for everyone around the world. And I'm happy that at least what came out of this, despite, well, not despite, but it was a devastating experience for everyone. But at least what we have now is the realization that, we need to be more mindful. We need to think about welfare. We need to think about mental health. Those were issues that were basically taboo before that.
Absolutely.
So now we can talk about it much more easily, and it's something that is talked about within businesses as well. And at least this helps us understand the psyche better of the people that work with us, and understand all the difficulties. Before, we didn't have that. No. I feel before that we were in a rat race and we didn't look left and right.
I agree. And I also think, going back to your previous point about, different areas doing different things, certainly I would like to think that maybe there is a light in all of this, in that, companies that went remote and have stayed remote in part or in whole. I'm very lucky. I work for a company that, I worked for Q88, and now we're owned by Vesson. And Vesson basically said you have 3 options. You could work full-time from home, which I was doing. You could work full-time in the office, or you could work a part-time schedule. Just let us know what it is. End of story. And they adjusted kind of a few things, in terms of like stipends and stuff based on what you were doing, right? Like, which is totally reasonable. It was fantastic. I mean, to me, I just think you could, there is a downside, if you're on a trading desk or something like that, you do want to be in an office. But I even had a discussion the other day with a broker friend of mine. And he said, yeah, we're in most days, but now it's less taboo if you have a 5-year-old that's sick to say, I'm going to work from home. And now they could do it. And really, doesn't miss a beat. I was in office with one of my clients a couple of days ago, and I could see one of the senior partners sitting there on the screen because his daughter got sick. And now in years past, it was like, no, the wife had to stay home, or there was a lot of problems with that, myself included. I remember having to deal with that. Now it's the flexibility to do things. Hopefully that gives what you going, kind of an attractiveness to the industry, and a flexibility, and the ability for people to look, when they hire, maybe a little bit of more of a diverse talent pool than they have before, because I think that's super important for any industry, especially ours, because we do cater to everybody in the world. We cater to everybody. So we should make sure that the people who do the catering look like the people who buy the products. That's maybe a little bit of a far reach, but I think we're on our way to get there. Speaking of which, what would you tell somebody? We talked a little bit about it. What would you tell somebody who's maybe interested in joining the industry? Why should they join?
I've been in this industry for so many years, and people ask me, what would you tell people? And I always try to convey how many opportunities this industry gives you. It's not an easy industry by any means. You really need to work hard. It does open doors and it opens new horizons. The thing is, young people need to know about our industry to then want to work in it. That's one of the aspects that we in the industry should look at again, to make sure that the word gets out. And on the other hand, is there one industry? I think there's not. Different people will define their version of shipping and maritime differently. The maritime industry includes elements of finance, insurance, software programming, engineering, diplomacy, IT, ports, offshore, sustainability, decarbonization. We discussed about it before. And of course, these are all sectors and roles found in other industries too. So we need to tell the younger generation that we have it within our industry as well. At the same time, if we're talking about, seafarers, we need seafarers, but the difference from 30 years ago is that we need them to not only keep the ship safe, we also need them to be fully engaged with what is going on. So that again is opening new doors for people. As digital, tools offer better insights, we need seafarers to be able to be as autonomous as they were before, but to also be engaged with the company that they work for the client that they service. They need to be engaged more than before. And we touched upon it, Chris, before, but we need to bear in mind that if we treat them badly, then they will work elsewhere. And then shipping will not get what we need. And that's people who are, dedicated to creating sustainable transformation. And we have not had a good history of treating seafarers well, particularly when they come from, we need to be honest about it, when they come from the developing countries. And of course, when I'm thinking about the period in the pandemic with so many authorities banning seafarers from traveling to and from ships. But there has been a lot of change, and we need to acknowledge that. And the change is for the better. Do we still have, incidents? We do. But we mentioned transparency before. Having technology, having social media, the word gets out. So that means that we need to be more responsible, we need to be more careful, and we need to encourage people to talk more about the good things in shipping and how it feels being in this industry, how it feels being a seafarer and working in this industry, whether it's a shore-based role or on board. We have changed, and I really do believe this for the better, and this should get out to people that don't know much about us.
I think that is one of the things that we as an industry do awfully, and that is talk about the good stuff, because our industry only gets press when there is a catastrophe, or you don't, here in the US, you don't have toilet paper because it's all stuck on a ship someplace in LA, or the Evergreen ship that was stuck in the canal, or there was the Roro that flipped off of Georgia, or you can just go through every maritime disaster and say, well, that's the maritime industry, where most of the times everything goes smooth. You have your toilet paper from Walmart or what have you, or whatever was missing at the time. And people go throughout their lives, without really ever being impacted. I think that the evolution of social media and I applaud Wista. I follow a few of the different chapters on Instagram. I think like Wista Peru and Wista, all these different places. It's fabulous to see what's going on. And I think that, connecting with other organizations, that was something that I was a president that I did a little bit of, but again, with COVID, it was difficult connecting with other maritime organizations, schools, and things like that, either directly with the maritime schools or not, is definitely an opportunity, because there is so much there that we do right. We're trying, it's one of the few times that actually the maritime industry is trying to get ahead of emissions regulations, self-regulating in a way. And these are some positive stories. It's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be a crooked line, but at least there's a lot of positive energy and effort. As we get to wrap up, this has been great so far. I love to ask the following question, and I'll put you on the spot. I know you're kind of on a retreat weekend here. What are you reading? Are you reading anything good? And I've gotten everything from sci-fi to, very focused business books. Or I had a couple of you say, Chris, I got little kids. I listen to audiobooks. That's fantastic too. So what are you, keeping yourself occupied with in that realm?
I do everything. I listen to audiobooks and I read all kinds of books. And I'm smiling now because today on Twitter, there was a tweet about one of my favorite books is Pride and Prejudice. So there was a tweet that did not reference the book, and everybody was getting so upset by it. And because it talked about a handsome guy that made £10,000 a year. And if you don't love Pride and Prejudice that much, you don't understand the tweet. So I was responding to this. So I do love, reading all kinds of books depending on my mood. So I have just actually today received a book called Future Politics, and it deals with the future of politics in a world transformed by tech. That will be my reading for the next few weeks. I will let you know how it goes.
Keep us posted. When we post the podcast, you can let us know how you enjoyed that book. Yeah, I'm kind of in between a few different books. I have like 3 books that I've kind of half started. I should really kind of just dive into one. One I'm reading is called The Hemings of Monticello. It's written about 10 years ago. It was about Sally Hemings, who is a slave in the Thomas Jefferson household. It's really interesting. It's super detailed because with notes and everything else. And if you want to have an interesting view of politics in early American politics and slavery and everything, it's a very good book. I think it won the Pulitzer Prize, I want to say, about a decade ago. I get into reading spurts where I'll bang off a whole bunch of pages and then I'll get distracted because I got 3 kids and a job and a podcast, so I get distracted. So life as it is. My wife reminds me. Anyway, well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast, Despina. Thank you so much, and thank you for your work with WISTA and really focusing, helping the industry and as well as the general population kind of learn a little bit more about that and really keep women's issues and workers' issues in the forefront. Thank you for coming on the pod.
Thank you so much, Chrissy. It has been great, and hope to see you soon again.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of The Last Dinosaur. You can find out more about Despina and what her company Tototheo is doing with a link in the show notes. I've also put a link in the show notes to WISTA, where Despina was president for several years, including some tough times during COVID. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating, and if you like this podcast, please tell your friends. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Aversano, wishing you all fair winds and following seas.